Welcome to Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. On this podcast, we journey through the devastating experience of the death of a child. Grief is seldom discussed openly in our culture, and the death of a child makes people feel even more uncomfortable. We approach the topic openly and honestly, speaking to people who have lost loved ones and experts who help care for them. Whether you are a parent experiencing loss or someone who wants to support another going through this tragedy, this podcast strives to offer hope and help.
Thank you so much, Katie, for agreeing to come on the Always Andy's Mom podcast today. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Of course, me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I've got to say, normally I often have guests on who feel like they know me pretty well because they've listened to every episode I've ever done or many episodes. But this is the one time where I almost feel like it's the opposite. I know you've listened to a handful of my episodes, but I have read your entire book. So I feel like I know you pretty well. So yeah. I'm excited to let my audience know a little bit more about you. Of course, we don't want to give everything away because I still want them to read the book because I was really moved by the book. It's very, very powerful. I love it.
Thank you so much, Marcy. Thank you for taking the time to read it and to share it with your audience. It has been such an incredible journey. And actually, I just today, Facebook reminded me that on May the 4th of 2016, I resigned from my job as an attorney. And that was after my daughter died. And that was after trying to go back to work. And then not even planning. I did not remember this because of course that was 6 years ago now. On May the 4th of this year is when I officially published my ebook on Amazon, Kobo, and with Ingram Spark. So the ebook became available on May 4th. So May the 4th be with you. So those two synchronistic things happened. And as you know, because you read the book, me choosing to leave my job as an attorney was a pivotal and hard choice, but something that I felt I had to do in order to recover and heal from my loss. So lots of amazing things are happening. And I love synchronicity. And I'm so glad you had a chance to read it already.
Well, and I really felt that decision so deeply with you because, as you may not know, but I am a pediatrician, a physician, and I had to leave my work for really a full year. I had to leave. I tried just as you did some weeks after. I think I went back a little earlier than you did, actually, and tried to work, but it was just too painful. And some of those stories that you relayed in the book about the painfulness and the reminders and things like that, I really resonated with because it was the same for me. And it got to the point where like, I just can't do this. And I didn't know if I could ever do it again. Right. At that point, and like, I may be done forever. Yeah. So it's a big decision to make, certainly. But anyway, I just felt really, when you think about the med school process and the law school process, there are so many similarities that way. So that's, I think, why I kind of felt that from you so much, just because that was really resonated with me.
Yeah. Thank you.
But what I want to start out by doing is I want to start out by talking about just Poppy's story and just the beauty of that. And really from the very beginning, because it's just a beautiful story of the love between you and your husband. And even from the bit before you even knew you were pregnant. So if you could tell that story, I would really love it.
Yeah, sure. So my husband, Eli, and I met in November of 2013 here in Seattle. I had moved the previous year from New York City where I was practicing law, and I was loving life on the West Coast at the time. He and I met. It was a sweet romance. We fell in love probably about 4 months after the first meeting. And we both knew at that point, because we were both, he was in his later 30s. I was in my early 30s, and we knew that we were meant for one another. So we had moved in with one another just 2 weeks before going on a vacation to Kauai, which was just and it was in February. So to go on a tropical vacation in February to me felt like I had just made it. Like there was
Yeah.
nothing more amazing than to go somewhere warm in the winter and like have the money to do it, have the time to do it. Like it really felt like a massive accomplishment, and to do it with someone that I loved, which was so special. So he and I were in Kauai. We'd been there for a couple days. We had talked about getting married, and I knew he had asked for my father's blessing, which of course is another really fun story that I tell later in the book when at the wedding. So I knew that it could theoretically happen on our vacation. And I thought it was a great opportunity. And if I was him, I would do it, and all these things, it was just my little brain just couldn't stop itself. But it got to the point where like I was kind of obsessing, and I realized I just had to let it go. Like we were a couple days into our vacation. It was Valentine's Day. I thought, gosh, would he really propose on Valentine's? Like, that's not really like him. I didn't think that he would choose Valentine's, but anyway, I let it go. And I said, you know what, you've got to just enjoy this vacation. And I did. And the very next day, he told me that morning that he wanted to watch the sunset that night. And I thought, okay, great. So we had this beautiful day. We snorkeled, we went out for happy hour, we got drinks, we got a bottle of wine. We found this perfect little spot on a grassy lawn in Kauai to watch the sunset. And that's where he proposed. And it was a very, very sweet proposal. And I was really actually quite surprised, and all of a sudden realized, oh my gosh, it's happening. Like this, it's really happening. And he had this beautiful solitaire diamond that's very much like my mother's. And the next day we found out we were pregnant. So Poppy was with us. She had been, I really had only missed my period by a couple days, but it was the next day, of course, and this is in the first couple of chapters of the book, so we're not spoiling anything. But I had this wonky feeling the next day when I was getting undressed to go swimming in this beautiful pool of water, and it crossed my mind. And I, as any woman who has ever been pregnant, has that sort of initial like, am I something? Whoa, wait, I am a couple days late. And then it all just like, oh my God, I think I'm pregnant. And it was that night that we took a pregnancy test. And so I went from being his girlfriend to being his fiance to being the future mother of his children in the span of like 72 hours.
Well, and I love how you talk about in the book, how his immediate reaction was just utter joy. And you were kind of in this looking like, wait, we just got engaged. Whoa, wait. You were a little more hesitant, but not even a second for him.
Nope. And I described that the way that he does his little happy dance in the car when I told him on the way home we were driving home from our hike. And I like kind of admitted, I was like, honey, we need to get a pregnancy test. And he was like, really? Like just totally. And he was like, ooh, like he, no doubt. And then, peed on the stick, the whole thing, like it's pregnant, I'm positive. Oh my God, no. Like I just, because, as a woman, right. We just think of like, no, it's like too soon, I'm not ready yet. Right.
Right.
And of course, our children, they come when they're ready. Right. And of course he and I, we weren't trying to get pregnant, but we did. And, as so many parents do. And we were so fortunate in that regard, of course, because now, of course, not also a spoiler, Poppy dies, but, so many,
everyone kind of figured that out by that point. Point, I think if you're on my podcast, Poppy died.
Yeah, Andy's mom. Yeah. I get it. Right. Exactly. Like that's spoiler alert.
I know.
Well, also it's the second paragraph of my introduction. It's just like,
right. Yeah.
I don't beat around the bush. But yeah, so yeah, Eli was very happy and remained happy the entire time, and really helped me start to feel that excitement within a couple hours of that. I went to bed that night just stoked. Like we were like, oh my God, we're gonna be parents. Like it just like, oh, and then of course he was like, so glad I asked you to marry me yesterday. Like it was
right.
The timing was divine. It couldn't have been better.
Right.
Yeah.
And your pregnancy went well overall, right?
I had a beautiful pregnancy. I mean, I was one of those women that glowed. I was beautiful and happy and flowy and bubbly and all of it. I felt wonderful. I felt purposeful. As someone who had always been sort of wrapped in the trappings of my intellectual brain and what I could, how I could perform and do and show up and, that kind of driven, like being pregnant was this completely new experience of beginning to understand this just miracle that was occurring within my body that I didn't have to think about, that I didn't, my brain didn't have to say, okay, now form her liver, now form her pancreas, now form her, her lungs. Like it just happened. And I loved it. It was so happy. We were so happy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. And so now you can talk a little bit about kind of that time and what happened. And
yeah. So my due date was October 25th of 2015. And we'd been in a beautiful pregnancy group here in Seattle through through Ballard Midwifery Clinic, where we met throughout our entire pregnancy. I think it was every other week or maybe monthly. I can't remember now, but with another group of parents that were also all due in October.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really cool because we were forming relationships with expecting parents and building community and being able to talk about all the weird symptoms and all the little exciting things. And our very last prenatal appointment was October, I think it would have been the 22nd or the 21st. It was the Wednesday before my due date. And when we went, all the babies had been born. So I was the only pregnant person left. And I was jealous and I was ready to I wanted my baby too. Like, I was ready and everything was fine. We got to hear Poppy's heartbeat, my there had never been any problems, never really any concerns. And, we left that meeting and just excited to know that soon I would be one of those women that was nursing my baby and I would just be in the club. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up going into labor on my due date, which was a Sunday. And we didn't know, as any first time mommy, like I was having cramps and I was like, I don't know, maybe these are early contractions. We just didn't really know, but we had a nice day. And then when I finally went to sleep that night, I was just like, I don't think I'm sleeping through the night. I could tell. Yeah. I woke up 2 hours later and I was like, this is it. Like I'm in labor. We knew it. And it was so sweet too, because Eli's precious. When I was going through the revisions process with my editor, as she was helping me edit, she was like, Katie, Eli is one of the best secondary characters I've read in a very long time. And I just loved that because, the memoir is 100% my perspective. I didn't interview anybody. I didn't ask anybody what they remembered. I didn't care. It's, it was just my story. And so Eli, when I woke up, he was still awake. He went into a complete frenzy, like completely lost his mind. I'm the one that's pregnant and in labor and he's losing his mind. So I told him to go to bed because I wanted him to get some sleep. And I ended up laboring through the night and we got the green light to go to the hospital early in the morning. We got there around 5 a.m. ish, I think it was. And we went upstairs and we were unpacking and the nurse Anne said that she needed to monitor Poppy's heartbeat to get a sense of how she was responding to contractions and that sort of thing. And so she got out her monitors and her straps and whatnot and squirt the jelly on my belly. And as we'd all done so many times before at this point with ultrasounds and whatnot. And she was having a hard time finding Poppy's heartbeat, which was really odd because I knew exactly where it was. Like, I knew it was just to the left and below my belly button. And I'm looking down at my bare belly and I look over at Eli and Anne says, I need to go get the midwife. And I was just like, like go get the midwife. Like, well, I don't know what's going on. And she brought Mia back, who was one of the midwives that we were familiar with from our treatment at that point. And Mia again got the Doppler monitor, looked around, kept looking around, and then said those 6 words that unfortunately so many parents have heard, but she said, Katie, I'm sorry, but we can't find a heartbeat.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course I can say all this now without crying because I've done so much healing work and it's been over 6 years, but that moment was just,
it's crushing.
Yeah. I mean, devastation beyond the pale, right? Like you don't even have you don't have a concept of how this could happen. I didn't include it in my book because, you can't include everything, but one of the thoughts that passed through my mind I think people will relate to this and understand, but one of the thoughts that passed my mind was, I was like, what is this little house on the prairie? I was like of timing, like, what do you mean? I was like, I think I remember, I think at one point I was like, she'll be stillborn. Like, the word, like, I was like, where did that word even come from me? Like, how did I all of a sudden know what stillborn is? Like, no one had talked about it. I hadn't read about it. They didn't warn you about it. They don't say, oh, just by the way, keep in mind, you can still have a stillborn. Like, I mean, nobody says that. Like and so all of a sudden, like, I'm just like, she's stillborn. Like, how often does this happen? Like, there were just like so many questions and so much shock, of course. And I think I do think that I captured that whole experience so beautifully. I mean, writing this book was such a labor of love. And I can tell you, I shed thousands and thousands of tears. And in the revisions process, I healed so much every time I went back. I mean, I had to, Marcy, I had to go back to my why 1,000 times. Like, why am I doing this? Why am I writing this book? And it started for me. It was my healing journey. It was to save my soul. But then I just over and over again, I had to come back. I know I had to think to myself, okay, 24,000 babies are stillborn in the United States every single year, Katie. That's 48,000 new mommies and daddies that are going through this. Like, remember, like, anchor myself to all of the other parents who are hearing those devastating words, who are going through this devastating process. Like, write your story for them, like, and of course, in Poppy's honor, of course, to remember Poppy, always, always to remember Poppy.
Yeah. Well, I think to what you said of kind of that, what is this happening and how is this happen? And it reminds me of when Andy died right after the car accident, and they came and, told me in the ambulance when we're still on the side of the road, despite our best efforts, we're unable to save your son. And I remember the thought going through my mind is, but he's on the side of the road. He didn't even make it to the hospital. Like, you're supposed to make it to the hospital. Right. And I'm thinking in your mind, it was similar, like, but she's not even out yet. We can't, like, she couldn't have died in here. She's safe in here, in my belly. Like, how could she die in my belly? And it seems very similar to me that you feel like, well, this just doesn't seem right. Like on TV, everybody dies in the hospital, at least, right? You don't just die on the side of the road and people are doing CPR and doing all this stuff on the side of the road and then you just stop. No, you're wheeled in the ambulance and you at least like try. And I mean, not that they couldn't have, right? I know that. But those are the thoughts going through your mind. Like, wait, no, this just can't be like this. Like, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, this doesn't. Yeah. No, of course not. To us, when did she die? Like, why did she die? How did she die? Like
she was alive 3 days ago or whatever, but you don't know.
Exactly. Like, yeah. I mean, and then of course, and that's the thing. I mean, I think that's the thing that's so crucial for any parent that goes through loss, whether it's in your situation where you had a few years with your son, or mine where I only had months and I never even, she never even took her first breath. Like, she, get that chance. Like, it's there. We have to talk about these things. Like, we have to talk about it to make sense, to try to understand, to give ourselves permission to move past the trauma of the actual event itself, and then to start making meaning and to start like you have with your podcast and all the other things that you do. Our children are so special and so unique, and yeah.
I interviewed some other parents just recently who also published a book too. And it was interesting. What he said was that they had their daughter for about 13 months before she died. And then they met someone who I think was a stillbirth. And he thought in his mind for a few minutes, well, but you never saw her living and breathing and whatever. So this is worse, because in his mind for that minute thinking, well, I think of all the other things that I miss because I have this. And then a few weeks later, he met someone who had a kid die who was like in the teens or early 20s or something like that. And he thought, wow, but mine is so much worse because you had so many more years to appreciate it. And then suddenly it was this revelation in his head that, like, oh my gosh, you can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. So it doesn't matter doesn't matter.
Oh,
Right.
no, it's so, yeah, that's one of the things that I'm learning about grief. And there are some people out there, researchers, who are understanding, grief. And it's so hard, because many people have asked me, like, oh, do you wish that she had lived for like a day and then she died? Or,
Yeah.
I mean, people don't ask it like that. Like, I got to get,
No.
but for those mothers, when I've met the mother that's like, their baby died at 36 hours. Right. So it's like, we contemplate, like we can ask each other, like, gosh, is it worse, like, to have never met her at all, or to have had a few moments and then have your baby die in your arms? Or in your case, the many years that you got to be with your son, and then to have him lost, like, it's grief, like it's loss.
It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. Yeah.
In the case of like pregnancy loss, what I was going to say about the researchers, which is so fascinating, is that what they're discovering is that the experience of grief, the emotions and the feelings around it, have nothing to do with the length of the pregnancy, and everything to do with the expectation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and I say that to honor all of the mommies and the daddies who are 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 14 weeks, whatever week, days, hours, it doesn't matter. It could have been a chemical pregnancy or an ectopic pregnancy. I mean, there's so many ways that, 1 in 4 pregnancies.
I mean, we lost one, we lost our first actually at about 13 to 14 weeks.
Oh, see, and like,
so
the expectation.
And what's funny is that we had just told people. Like I hit the end of the first trimester and I was like, okay, I'm in second trimester. It's safe to tell people. Nope. And I'm just going to tell people. And then literally days later, we lost him. I always say it's a him in my mind. I don't know why. It's just, that's what it was in my mind. And so you feel like that. So after that, it's funny. Then subsequent pregnancies, then I was like, I'm not telling people because I told people, and then days later, and then I thought to myself, if I lose the next one at 9 weeks and I haven't told people yet, well, that's kind of worse, because now no one's going to be there to support me because they didn't know.
You know what, Marcy, I was about to call you Andy. Marcy, I am so happy you were saying this, because I never fully understood, or I never even questioned. Why do we wait until the end of our first trimester to tell people we're pregnant? Like, I just didn't question it, because I didn't have any context for it. And then I lost my baby. And then I'm in support groups, and I see all these people with having had miscarriages who are like, oh, but my loss isn't as bad as yours. And I'm like, could you knock it off? Like, are you kidding? Like, your loss is your loss. Like, it doesn't matter. Right. And then the sadness, the part that I ached for them was and we hadn't told anyone yet.
Right.
So now I'm returning to work 3 days after having had a miscarriage. I'm crushed. I never told anyone I was pregnant. So I can't ever tell anyone I had a miscarriage, because no one cared. Like, no one had been able to anchor into my excitement. So I can't drag anybody into my sadness. And I'm like, oh my gosh, can we please dump the waiting until the end of your first trimester? I mean, I get it. It's an intimate experience. And if it's just you and your husband and all of your family and your relatives, just tell somebody so that if you do go through a loss, you don't have to then also be like, hey, by the way, I was pregnant and now I'm not. Like, I think that practice is antiquated, and I don't think it has a purpose anymore. And if someone wants to disagree with me, that's fine. I don't care. That
Right. And maybe it depends on your personality a little bit, certainly. But, I think back a little bit to your book, and after you lost Poppy, and when your dad walked into the nursery and saw it and felt his knees crying and saying, this makes it more real. And that's the thing you want. You need it to be real for other people, not like, oh, yeah, I was pregnant and now I'm not. And then it never seemed real to them ever.
Yeah. I know, I'm glad you brought that up, because my dad is such a pivotal character in the book, and was such a huge man and force in my life. And he still is spiritually. He's very much, hi, Dad. He's very much a part of my life. But having that moment with him where he fell to his knees and said, this makes it all so much more real. What I was like, whoa, like for me,
Right.
and it's funny, Marcy, because I would have forgotten that he said that had I not journaled. And for anyone listening to this podcast who is going, is actively going through grief, like if journaling is something that feeds you, please, please, please do it, because you're going to forget stuff. And then I found this journal entry in writing my book and revising. I'm going back through all my journals, and I found this little just scribble about like, and then he fell to his knees and he said this. And I was like, I didn't even remember it until I
Right.
saw that it was written down and saw that it happened. And then it meant so much more because I had chosen to incorporate my father's death into the book, and, and our relationship and what I learned about grief and death and dying because of Poppy, what she taught me, and how I was able to approach my father's death in a whole different way. But yeah, that was a big moment.
Yeah. So why don't you talk a little bit now about that, about your grief journey, about how you kind of kept Poppy alive, and how Poppy, spiritually, what that meant to you, and a little bit with your husband too, I think.
Yeah, sure. So I've always had a spiritual life. I was I grew up in the church a bit, but I kind of got away with that because other things happened in my life that are not relevant to this podcast. But I've always been spiritual, and so when Poppy died, it was instantaneous, this longing that I had to connect with her, to be her mommy,
Yes.
I
Yes.
wanted to be her mommy, and I was
Exactly.
so ready to be her mommy. And so it was this experience, of mothering a spirit, of mothering, of nurturing a relationship with a guide, with a force, and it's interesting because there was definitely a point in my process, and I think I write about this, but where Poppy's, in my mind and in my heart, for a long time, Poppy was a baby. And then there was this sort of this transition where Poppy was no longer a baby. I didn't relate to her as this thing that I want to swaddle and have in my arms, but the force of love, a much, much bigger, her purpose for me in my life, and for so many others now that I've written the book and can share her story, but just a guide. I mean, kind of like God energy, Christ-like energy, like this pure love I did so many things. I created so many little rituals to be with her, from journaling and writing letters to her, Dear Poppy. And actually, Dear Poppy was the very first working title of the book. Remembering Poppy was also another working title of the book. And then, of course, Still Breathing became the final title. And that's another beautiful story of how I came up with that. But lighting candles. I mean, from the very beginning, I was just like, I want to light a candle. And I remember that first day we were home, that night, a friend asked, what can I do? And I said, I want candles. And so she dropped off candles. And so we lit candles, and we kept a candle lit. And in fact, here where I am, where my office is, we have a hanging lantern, and it's one of those beautiful star lanterns, and we never turn it off. And it's Poppy's light. It's like that candle that we don't blow out. But, and it's funny, I forgot that it had that purpose. And my husband recently reminded me, and I was like, really? I don't remember that we did that. But little things like that, we do things like every Christmas we buy her a Christmas ornament, and we hang it on the tree, and it's very intentional. Very intentional. Either Eli and I will do it together. Meditating with her, calling her spirit in, and it was hard because there were, in my healing process, with grief, right? There was so much shock, of course, that those first few weeks. And then that started to kind of, when that wore off and sort of reality kind of started to set in, this, my baby's never coming back. No matter how many,
this is my life now.
Yeah. No matter how candles I light, no matter if bouquets of flowers are sent, no matter how cards in the mail, like this is mine and mine alone to deal with. Like, this is my journey. This is my cross to bear of like, I have to figure out how to get through this. And there were times when I felt very disconnected from her spirit, and then I would remember, oh, okay, I have to do this. I have to create this ceremony, this ritual. And so I did. And so Poppy became a spirit guide for me. She became a force that could help me make decisions and see more clearly. I mean, but it wasn't before I went through a great depression and a terrible sadness. And, with Eli, our grief process was very different.
Mm-hmm.
As any two humans are going to have a different grief process anyway. But I think especially mothers and fathers, I think it's just different. Like,
yeah,
as mothers, and it took me a long time to, sort of own that and feel empowered by that. And to say that, not because I worked with an acupuncturist, pelvic floor therapist for a long time. And we did all this beautiful spiritual work together and she's filling me full of needles. And, but, because I would always say, oh, and Eli too. And I would always just like, oh, and Eli has his thing. And one day, BB was just like, Katie, honey, you were Poppy's mommy. Like, Eli's experience is never going to be your experience. Like, she was, she came to life inside of you and she died within you. You gave birth to her, you carried her. Like, there's no relationship more intimate than that. And I'm like, okay, you're right. Like, so I really had to step into owning that, like, our experiences were different for very real reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very hard on our marriage. We got married, we had this beautiful wedding, April 25th of 2015, 10-ish, 12-ish weeks after finding out that we were pregnant, like very soon.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was a beautiful wedding, so we're 6 months married when Poppy dies. So we're 6 months. I had tried going back to work. I ended up taking about 4 months off. Eli took 3 months off. We took time to bond. I mean, that was a massively, I'm so proud of us for doing that. It wasn't easy. Neither one of us had paid leave. The FMLA was just, we just did it, we just started using our savings and spent time together so that we could heal. But we ended up finding a couples therapist that helped us navigate our healing together, helping us understand how we process things differently. I can make decisions. I'm a go-getter. When I'm anxious, you can see it all over my face. Eli is much more withdrawn, much more reserved, much more internal and quiet, and doesn't process. Well, he's different now because he's grown a lot and he's been in therapy for a little while, which I'm so proud of him. But at the time, he really didn't have access to his feelings, and he didn't know how to articulate what he was feeling. And I couldn't understand. I couldn't fathom that when he said, when someone said, how do you feel? That when he says, I don't know, I thought he was lying. I thought he was avoiding. I thought he was like, but what I came to understand in therapy was that he really didn't know.
Yeah.
And then the empathy, it took a long time and it was hard, but like, I was able to go, oh, he's not avoiding this. And he's not feeling, he just doesn't know. And because of his child and in his upbringing and things that happened to him personally in his life, where he had to just kind of bottle up and pull up his bootstraps and move forward and go, in the world. And so then this next traumatic thing happened to him. And again, he was sort of approaching it from the, like, I just have to like get through this, and
I think that, and the men whose wives have a stillbirth or a miscarriage or something like that, they feel this great responsibility to take care of you.
Yes.
And so I think that ends up can really negatively impact their grieving process, because they feel like they need to take care of you. And societally, what did everyone say to Eli? I'm sure it was, I'm sorry. How's Katie?
How's Katie?
How's Katie? I mean, I bet he could count. I mean, it was 10 to 1. How's Katie?
Absolutely.
Over how are you?
Absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
that reinforces in his mind is, well, Katie's the important one here. I can't think about myself right now. Katie's the one. Katie's the one.
So
Katie's
true.
the one.
And that's another cultural practice that we have got to quit. Like in to the extent that I say, like, let's announce our pregnancies, but let's acknowledge our men. Let's acknowledge our fathers. Let's ask our fathers how they're doing and give them space to heal and grow and invite the conversation in so that it's the couple and how are both of you, but please, yes. Remember,
I mean, if you're talking to the dad, I would really appreciate you to talk for a good 5 minutes before you ask how the wife is, right? I mean, because you really need to validate that man's feelings, because in asking how's Katie, you have just reinforced again that how I'm doing doesn't matter. Working on my own thing doesn't matter. So when you ask him, how are you? And when somebody asks you, how are you? Of course, he's going to say, I don't know, because he's had no time to even try to think about it, because that's not what he's supposed to do.
Exactly. Right. Like he's supposed to be the rock. He's supposed to be, exactly. Our men are supposed to carry us through these things. And, and it was interesting too, because that mindset caused me and many times to resent him, because I didn't want to be fixed. Because I didn't want to feel like I was a problem. Because I didn't want anybody to tell me that I was broken. If I felt broken, that's one thing. But for someone to be like, oh, you're a problem that needs to be fixed, and like, let's get you help. And it's like, whoa, like back off. Like I'm going through my own process. And if my own process is like slobbering on the kitchen floor, then that's my process. Like, you go over there and not know how you're feeling, and I'm going to go over here and slobber on the kitchen floor. Right. I mean, there were plenty of moments like that. Right. And I mean, like moments that did not make it into the book. Right. Cause like, I didn't need to write the whole thing. Like, but those moments existed. Right.
Yeah, for sure. When people say some of those things that I know that have bothered you, that really bothered me was, she's in a better place, or this one, even if you say, Poppy would want me to be happy, it's fine. If someone else says to you, well, Poppy would want you to be happy, so you shouldn't be, implicate, you shouldn't act like this because Poppy would want you to be happy. Like, don't tell me that. Like, if I tell me that, it's one thing, but if you tell me that, then you're like trying to force you to be somewhere that you're not ready to be yet.
Exactly. Well, and I've learned that so much, and Brene Brown's teachings have really helped me have a language for these types of conundrums. Because I mean, let's be real, like grief is so complicated and it's so messy, and people are going to say things that are wrong or uncomfortable, or they didn't mean it that way, or it got
and it's still better than saying nothing, right?
Yeah,
it's still better than saying nothing.
It's still better than like ghosting on people. But what, it's amazing how much people will try to avoid feeling uncomfortable, because grief makes people uncomfortable. So that whole thing of like, Poppy would want you to be happy is those words are that person's attempt to avoid feeling uncomfortable themselves.
Right.
They don't want to feel uncomfortable. So if you aren't happy, it would be much better if you could just be happy while I'm here, or I'm going to go. Like, as
a reminder for you, Andy would want you to be happy. So let's just be happy, at least for a few minutes while I'm here. So I don't have to see you
45 minutes. Can we just be happy? And then you can go back to be feeling like that again. Cause you're making me feel really uncomfortable right now. And it's like, oh, really? Would you like, I mean, and I got to give people grace, because, and I've learned so much.
Oh, for sure. Even
I, having been through my own losses, have learned. And there are times when I'm like, oh gosh, Katie, like, cause I'll say a thing and I'm like, wow, as aware and compassionate and empathetic and loving as I am still very capable of also saying the quote unquote wrong thing or the thing. But at least I'm like, but then when I do that, I go, oops. And I say, oh, you know what? I think that was insensitive. I apologize, so just also if it, for anyone listening, if you feel like you've said a thing and it hurt the person that was grieving, just apologize. Just say, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. And I guarantee you the griever will be like, it's okay. At least you said something, right? Cause like, it's
right.
Like at least you tried.
I know for sure. So I love too, I'd like you to touch on keeping Poppy alive after having your next child, because you did have another little girl.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, we have a 4.5-year-old now. Her name is Moxie Phoenix, and she is both a Moxie and a Phoenix. And I started talking about Poppy. I started telling Moxie about her big sister immediately. I mean, immediately, like probably the day she was born, probably, you know what I mean? Like whispering little sweet nothings. And I've done it, Moxie very much knows that she has a big sister. She knows Poppy Annabelle. She knows about the story. I mean, she knows mommy's been writing a book. She knows mommy's got to go edit the book. She knows mommy's got to go try to sell the book. It's 100%. And I think actually one of the sweetest moments that I've had in the last, I'll say like 6 months, was sitting at the front doorstep, tying Moxie's shoes and saying to her, Moxie, you can't read yet, but someday when you read, you're going to get to read this book. You're going to get to read the book that mommy wrote in honor of you and your big sister. And she's just like, really?
Yeah.
So excited. And because you've read the book and you've got a little bit of that insider info, Moxie has been a channel in many ways for Poppy's spirit. So I think, our children come into this world they're so open. They're full of source energy, that they're so bright and pure. And I do believe that our children have the capacity to, they're aware of spirits, you know what I mean? They're just aware. And so Moxie has been very aware of her sister her whole life. And there have been these very poignant moments where maybe I'm thinking of Poppy, and then Moxie will ask me if I'm thinking of Poppy, and then it will facilitate a conversation. And it's so sweet because she's always done, she's 4.5 now. So you can imagine that the nature of these conversations are so tender and sweet. And as Moxie's learning to talk, there's a different, like her language ability has grown, of course, but at times when she was like just a toddler learning how to work. And again, in my epilogue, there's this story of Moxie was on the changing table and I was rubbing coconut oil into her legs. And I think I was feeling sad, or I was, because I had all these tender moments after Moxie was born where it was that realization of everything I had lost, because before I could only imagine what I had lost. But then once Moxie was alive, and once I actually had a living, breathing baby, and then it was like, it was all those moments that I didn't get with Poppy. And so there were so many tender moments like that when I was with Moxie, but I was missing Poppy, and it was very convoluted. And I will say, I did actually go through postpartum depression after Moxie was born in a way that I hadn't gone through it when Poppy died, because it was more like just grief depression versus postpartum. But then I had all the sleep deprivation after Moxie was born, and then all the it was like very, very complicated. But I was back, I'm rubbing coconut oil on her legs, and she just goes, sister. Just one word, and this sister. And I looked down at her and I said, your sister? She said, yes, Poppy. You miss her? And I was just like, I do miss her. I do miss her. And then I started crying, and there was this period of time where she just would always remind me, it's okay, mommy. It's okay. And then she asked me if I needed a tissue.
Oh.
Need a tissue? She was, I don't even know if she was 2. She might have been 2. Need a tissue? And I'm just like blubbering, like, what? No, darling, I'll use my sleeve. I love you. Just like, oh my goodness, to just be like, oh, thank you, God. Thank you. Thank you for these moments where my child is aware enough to just innocently call in her sister's energy when I needed it. So then we were all there together, and there were, and I'm definitely not going to spoil the epilogue, because there's so many beautiful stories of, how how Moxie has channeled Poppy and my father. And yeah. So,
it's just funny what little kids, I think, can sense sometimes. And,
yes.
I have a similar story I've shared once in the podcast, so I'll share it again. And that, on the day Andy died, my daughter was home actually, and by herself. And so we had called my pastors, and the younger junior pastor does all the work with the youth. So he knew our daughter very well. And so it was decided that obviously we all had to go to the hospital. It was decided that he would go to my house and get her and bring her to the hospital. And so he had been on his way home, and he had to call his wife. So he had to call his wife, and she was giving her son, who was just about 3, like had him in the shower or the bath or something. And they were in the bathroom together. And she had took this call that, Andy Larson, the Larsons were in a car accident. Andy Larson is dead. And she didn't want to cry in front of him. So he was like in a towel, and she went outside in the bathroom and talked to him a little bit, and then thought, I got to get back together because I had to dry him off and get him in his PJs and put him to bed. And so she walked back in, and he just ever so innocently looked at her and said, he's in heaven with his friends, Mommy. And she just, because he wouldn't have known. There was no way for him to know, right? She hadn't said anything. There was no way for him to know. And she said, who is Mommy? Or who is honey? And he said, I don't know. He said, oh, the boy. I don't know his name.
Oh.
And that was it. And she said, even though he was a pastor's kid, he was just 3. So they really hadn't talked much about heaven ever. For him to have said that the boy was in heaven with his friends. I mean, where did that ever come from? And she didn't tell me for at least 6 months. It was a very, very long time before she told me, because she didn't know how ready I would be
to hear that.
But how powerful was that? That was really minutes after Andy died that he got that gift from God, that then we were able to know later on. But it is just proves your point, as somehow when they get older, I think, they lose that kind of ability or what it is. But he just took that as at face value. It came to him, and he just told his mom. Like when you get older, you're just not going to do that anymore.
Right. You question, we don't trust our intuition anymore. We're shut off because the world we become skeptical, and and it's very normal.
But when you're 3, that stuff happens to you, and you just say it,
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's such a,
so it reminds me very much of that with Moxie, even though obviously he didn't know Andy, he didn't know his name, he didn't know anything about him, but he did know a boy was in heaven with his friends. So
I love that.
Yeah. So I'm going to go on to change the subject a little bit now, because originally we were going to have this interview a few weeks ago.
Yes, that's true.
And it was going to be released right around the time of your book release. But you had another big thing happen.
I did.
So I think you should talk about that a little bit now.
Yeah, I will. So I was recently diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. And I felt a lump in my left breast on February 4th. I was reading stories to Moxie that night, and I just had my hand resting on my breast, and I felt this thing, and I just thought, gosh, it literally just overnight. I don't think it was there the day before. It could have been there the day before. I don't know if it was there the day before that. Like, it was just like all of a sudden I felt this thing, and I thought, oh my gosh, do I have cancer? I went there immediately in my brain. I allowed myself immediately to say, that is not correct. Like, that feels wrong. And I had my daughter feel it. She's like, Mommy, what's going on? Like, what's wrong? And I said, feel this. And she felt it. And I was like, do you remember Mommy's boobie feeling like that? Like, I don't know. Like, we're very body
Yeah.
positive, naked family, like whatever, like, and she's like, no. And then I had my husband feel it that night. And fast forward 5 weeks later, I'd gotten a mammogram scheduled. March 14th, I went in, I had my first ever mammogram. The very next day, my naturopath called me, having just had a conversation with the radiologist, and was like, Katie, it's cancer. Like, just like,
Yeah.
and I'm standing there at the kitchen counter. Eli says, he's like, I'll never forget the look on your face. Cause he was there. He could see the whole thing unfolding. And I just like mouthed the words to him. I was just, like, it's cancer. And whirlwind, by the end of the week, I'd had additional mammograms, ultrasounds, a biopsy, which then on the pathology report confirmed that it was cancer. After that, I had CT scans and bone scans and MRIs and brain MRIs and all the things. So I am now 2 rounds into chemotherapy treatment. I am getting about 5 months of chemotherapy. I have a port. I don't know if this is
Oh,
on.
yes.
Yeah, I've got my port. It's so weird. It looks like a tadpole, like underneath my skin, a big old gnarly tadpole. Anyway, so I've got my port. I have lost my hair. I've been through this journey of embracing the hair loss.
Yeah. If you are watching, you can see that she's got a little bit of hair left and it's pink.
a
So
little bit of hair.
if you're watching the video version,
I had a nice dark blonde pixie, just classy haircut. Then I bleached it, and then I dyed it hot pink, and then I had a mohawk, and now I have a pink buzz cut, and soon I will be, of course, completely bald, because all these little tiny baby hairs are falling out too. And if you're interested, you can follow my journey on Katie Joy Duke Instagram. So, I'm very open about this process. And, it was interesting, Marcy, because it took me a while to come to terms with being stage 4, right? Because everyone's like, oh, I hope you caught it early. And like, oh, what's the stage? Because it took us a while to stage it. That takes a while to figure that all out. I knew that I was going to have chemo, a mastectomy, and radiation before we actually knew that it was also in my sternum. So I have like a raisin-sized bit of cancer in my sternum. They're treating me as if it were stage 3, because the cancer is so localized to the original source, which means that we've caught it, which is why I had to have a brain MRI to confirm that it wasn't in my brain. And after we confirmed that it wasn't in my head, although I am slightly crazy, I do not have cancer in my head. Then I was like, okay, I think now I'm willing to be open about this whole thing. Cause I was thinking about not telling the world my stage, my type, my whatever. I was just gonna say I have breast cancer and it's nobody's business. But then as I sat with that and processed it and sort of grieved it, the trauma of it, the overwhelm of it, like all of that, I realized, gosh, Katie, here you are at the tippity top of this mountain, and you're about to release your book, and this 6 years of hard work, and you've crawled through hell and back. And, and I thought, wait a second, if vulnerability and transparency and honesty are your values, which those are 3 of my values, then hedging around my diagnosis, the reason I really didn't want to tell anybody, because I didn't want to have to deal with other people's fear. I didn't want to have to deal with the nonsense that was going to come out of other people's mouths. Right. Like I didn't want to deal with like the looks of like pure dread on their face of like, oh my God, you're going to die, because I'm going to die, but I don't think I'm going to die anytime soon. And if it's of breast cancer, may it be in 40 years, when I'm 81, but I realized that I have a voice, and God has given me the opportunity to have be a voice for bereaved mothers and bereaved parents and pregnancy loss and pregnancy after a loss and all the things that still breathing my book is about. And now I've been given this other unique and beautiful opportunity to apply everything that I've learned the first time around to now this my own life, my own journey, my own healing, my own and where having cancer will take you, because I think the interesting thing is that most cancers are not lifestyle cancers. I mean, yeah, they're not lifestyle. I mean, even we know people that have had lung cancer who've never smoked a cigarette in their life, right? So like cancer is not personal and it just happens, right? Like I didn't do it to myself. I didn't make choices. Maybe my trauma made me more susceptible. I don't know. Like there's all sorts of spiritual questions about it, but I am excited to smother my cancer with love and invite it to leave my body and use the chemotherapy and the treatments and all the homeopathies and the antioxidants and the amino acids and all the things I'm doing to, I'm trying to change the vernacular around fighting everything, the war.
Oh, I know. I actually don't. I really hate that. I hate that term
I have to be
because
really,
it really indicates that there are winners. And then if there are winners, then there have to be losers. And if you die of cancer, then you're a loser. Like that's terrible. So, so that's why I hate that too.
It's hard because it's a very ingrained vernacular. Like it is, if you look at the American Cancer Society, you look at all of it, like it's always a fight, it's a war, it's a battle. And so I do this not with non-attachment. Like I am not attached to how anyone else chooses to speak about their own experience with cancer or whatever. Like, but for mine, because I am a I call myself now I'm joking about it, but I say that I'm a professional rester. I've had to learn how to rest. Like the last 6 years, they've taught me nothing. They've taught me to try to get into the parasympathetic mode as often as I can, rest and digest, take the nap, sit on the couch and do nothing, be in that peaceful place, find a state of calm, and anything I can do to help my nervous system recover from whatever life is throwing my way. And in this case, life is throwing me cancer, and life is throwing me chemo, and life is throwing me cancer and chemo when I'm excited about launching my book. You know what I mean? So like I have all these, again, it's like I'm holding space with so many different things and so many different conflicting emotions. But so I'm gonna smother it with love, and I'm going to heal and get through it. And I'm going to be a voice for others. And I'm going to be vulnerable. I shaved my head live on Facebook yesterday to my Facebook community. Social media, Instagram, I'm building my community on Instagram, but Facebook in particular has been a vital source of community for me for the last 6 years. After Poppy died, I was because I had been very open about my pregnancy. I was one of those moms that was like, posting like belly shots and, doing all that, really, really excited. So it was equally as devastating for my community when Poppy died. And ever since then, I've just been nurturing online a connection with a lot of people that otherwise I wouldn't have if social media didn't exist. So yesterday I went live and shaved my mohawk off, and so many people were so sweet. I pulled out a clump of hair before I did it so that people would say like, hey guys, this is what this is what it looks like when you're losing your hair. Like, so just to give people, again, more understanding of maybe if they're going through it, or their mother or sister or best friend or neighbor or whoever, to offer more compassion and empathy to people when we're going through hard things.
Well, and I just think about your experience with Poppy and all that has done for you in so many areas, but I would say it has done a lot for you in this new cancer smothering situation that you have as well, right? You are in a much different place than you would have been without that. So it's yet another sort of gift that Poppy has given you.
It is. It's and you said all the right things, and I know it takes courage to say those kind of things, but I honor your reflection, and I really do. Poppy has given me so many gifts, and she's my daughter. She's my spirit guide. She is love. I'm so lucky to have been her mommy, that she chose me, that God chose her for me. I mean, all the things that Eli is, that we just celebrated our 7th wedding anniversary this past weekend. And we went back to the garden where we got married in Seattle and took some pictures and kissed. And I'm so thankful for this life and for my child, my living child. I'm so thankful to be a mother and everything.
Yeah, I just think it's beautiful. One other thing that you had shared before we started recording is now that you are in this cancer, experiencing cancer, it's different though when you really don't fear death like you may have otherwise, right?
Yes,
Mhm.
yes, I did share that. I'm glad you brought that up. Before we started talking, before we hit record, I shared with you that if I choose to believe, and I do, that my daughter, my father and Poppy were able to reunite together in this wonderful place that we like to call heaven. We've got this word heaven. If when my daddy died 3 years ago, Poppy was there to meet him, then it means, and I'd never contemplated this before, but it truly touched this place deep, deep, deep within my soul. It means that when I die, I get to be reunited with my daddy.
Both of them.
And my grandmommies and my ancestors and my, and anyone who dies between now and then. And that to me was just like, oh, because I told you, like, after Poppy died, I'd never needed to know so bad where a soul goes, like when a soul dies, like, but where, like, is it heaven? Is it just outer space? Is it nowhere? Is it, like, is it here? Is it actually in my heart? Like, I don't know, like, does a soul grow? Like I contemplated a billion different questions. But yes, to think that when I die, I too get to go back into that pool of source energy and be reunited, and then maybe transformed and come back. I don't know. Like, we don't know. There's so many.
Well, and the beautiful thing you said is, hopefully it's 40 years from now.
Yes, a long time. I am not ready to go.
But if it's not, it's okay too. It's okay too.
It's okay. And I'm leaving a legacy, and and my book. That's the thing too, that I'm truly. I think that's one of the things that I'm most proud about when it comes to my book, is that I have left a legacy. Like, if I did nothing else from this moment on, but just take care of myself and be with my family, that's enough. Like, I've written the book, I did it. May the fourth be with me. Like, I got it done, and I set out to do it over 6 years ago, and I'm finally seeing it all come to fruition, and it feels so good.
So one more time, tell people how they can get the book and how they might want to follow you on social media, because I know people will want to do that too.
Yeah. So as of this very moment, and it is May 6th, so not sure when you're going to drop the actual recording of the episode, but in this very moment, the ebook is available on Kindle. There's a 99-cent sale for 30 days. So trying to really promote the book, get it out there, buy it for next to nothing, tell all your friends about it. The paperback will be available to purchase later this month. So in May, you'll be able to order the paperback worldwide. Amazon, booksellers will be able to get it wholesale on Ingram Spark. So I'm excited. If you're a bookseller and you want my book in your bookstore, please reach out. Kobo, it's going to be on Kobo, which I think is Walmart's print company. But so Kindle, you can buy it right now. And my website is katiejoyduke.com. I'm building it out. I've had a few bumps in the road, i.e. that is a cancer diagnosis in the last few months. So I've been working on my website. There's going to be a lot of amazing interactive ways to learn more about me, my coaching practice, my writing. So yeah, check me out there. And then again, on Instagram, I'm katiejoyduke.com. That's who I am. Katie Joy Duke.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you, Marcy.
Thanks for listening to Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. Please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. We are always looking for new show ideas. If you'd like to be a guest, know someone who'd be a great guest, or have a show idea, please email us at marcy@andysmom.com. Be sure to visit the webpage, andysmom.com, for more content, including Marcy's blog. There you can also sign up to receive updates via email. Together, let's work to inspire hope, one day at a time.